Hey guys, I'm volNiceCrow. My game Spryke, which you can see here, is fast moving, so to make that fast experience as fluid as possible for the player, I've developed a custom camera that responds to the player's needs, moving to show what's ahead of her when needed, but also knowing when to slow down and keep out of the way. I completed stage 1 of the camera system last year, but I've just spent the past few weeks finishing and improving it. I've now made the camera about as robust as I can possibly make it, and I'm very pleased with the result, so I've decided to share it publicly for the benefit of other Clickteam Fusion developers. I'm calling it volCAMERA, and it's on the Click store for just a few bucks. volCAMERA is essentially the same camera system that Spryke uses, but modified and further developed to make it as easy as possible to port into your own game. It's highly modular, very customizable, and it uses regular, well-commented Fusion code, so you can further build upon it if you wish. volCAMERA comes with a built-in console that lets you tweak its many settings on the fly. When you've found the settings that you like, you then press the Save to Text button to export those settings to a file, which will take you through the steps of importing it into your own game. All the information you need is in the MFA file itself, but I'll use this video to briefly explain each feature and setting. So the most basic form of camera style in a game is probably simple position locking. In other words, having the camera always centered on the player at all times. Now it's okay. This is a workable solution, but it's not great. It has a few problems. For example, it's not a very graceful form of movement. It's quite stop and start. Things like landing will make your character feel like a bowling ball. Thunk, thunk. There's no bounce or spring or softness or ease in or ease out motion in this sort of camera. And it can, for that reason, become quite uncomfortable on the eye sometimes, especially if there's a lot of fast or erratic movement, a lot of jumping. So if you want a smoother, more organic camera feel, then you can use something called linear interpolation, otherwise known as LERP. LERP is used in many games, and it forms the basis of volCAMERA as well. So you can see now that the camera is a lot smoother. And it's actually being calculated in 2 separate steps now. So you've got a target, which is still centered exactly on the player at all times, but now you've got the camera follows the target with a bit of a delay and a bit of softness and smoothing of its movement. Now you can control the speed of the LERP, in other words, the speed with which the blue camera reaches the grey target, with a single value that's just universal to all sorts of movements. There it is, quite fast. We can make it really sort of slow and soft. You can use that. You can control that with one value, or you can actually separate it into different values. So, for example, you could have the X movement while you're jumping to be really fast, or the X movement while you're on the ground to be really slow, if you wanted that. So you've got a whole lot of customization options there. We can also control how the camera behaves around boundaries. So we can use snap, where the camera will simply stop when it can't move any further. Or we can use LERP, where the camera will use a soft LERP cushion movement when it hits a boundary. One of the drawbacks of a LERP camera is that by its very nature, the camera is always a little bit behind the player. So that can actually mean that when you're moving in one direction, you can see a lot of what's behind you, but not necessarily what's ahead of you. If I dramatically slow down the LERP camera speed, you can really see what I mean, to exaggerate the point. That's a problem, right? So one solution to this is to use Overshoot. So volCAMERA comes with left-right Overshoot, which is very customizable. So this basically makes the camera look ahead in whichever direction you're moving at that time. So now, I can actually see more ahead of me and less behind me. The camera is actually ahead of me, and still it uses that slow, smooth LERP movement. You can control how far ahead it looks, how fast it jumps ahead. You can have it almost instantly jump ahead, or you can have it just slowly grow towards that place, towards that extent. And spring back, you can have it just sort of gently, casually cruise back to the player when you stop, or you can have it almost instantly spring back. And you can also lock it to overshoot. So you can always also have an overshoot that locks. Even if you're not moving, it will still look ahead. depending on which was your last direction. In other words, the camera's never centered on the player now. It always shows you what's ahead of you, depending on whether you're looking left or right. So we also have access to fall overshoot. So by default, when a player falls, naturally she moves towards the bottom of the screen, and then only a little bit after will the camera catch up to her. The result of that is that when you fall, you can't really see much of where you're falling until perhaps it's too late. So with fall overshoot, it works just like left to right overshoot, but only when you're falling downwards. So if we activate fall overshoot, suddenly the camera will shoot ahead while you're falling and show you much more of what's below you. So here I'll take off all this HUD stuff. So this is what it looks like without fall overshoot, just default. You pretty much just see the ground as you hit it. And if we turn it on, a fall overshoot, we get a little bit more warning of what's below us. And of course you can change the distance and the speed and the spring back as before. Now fall threshold is something you can change. That will determine when fall overshoot actually kicks in, because of course every jump has a fall in it, right? You go up and then you fall down. Now if this were set really low, then fall overshoot would trigger every single time you jump, even on the spot. So you can control quite finely what volCAMERA considers a fall. So in this particular demo, 1500 is sort of the sweet spot. Fall overshoot won't trigger when jumping, but it will trigger as soon as you fall. As we have fall overshoot, we also have jump overshoot. Now this is something I would just use for springs and other features in the game that would send the player hurtling upwards faster than normal. So ordinarily, if the player hits something that makes her go really high, really quickly, you sort of won't see very much of what's ahead of you until half a second later and the camera catches up. So as with fall overshoot, jump overshoot will force the camera to leap ahead. So it'll force this grey target to leap ahead, even ahead of the player, which will in turn force the blue camera to move up towards the player quite fast, and in fact in some cases jump ahead of the player. So jump overshoot lets you see ahead of yourself when you're jumping. You can use it in tandem with fall overshoot, so you can always sort of see more of where you're going, whether that's up, whether that's down, whether that's left or right. You can use all three overshoots. They're all compatible. And as with fall overshoot, jump overshoot has a threshold value that you can control here, because of course we don't want jump overshoot to trigger on every single little piddly jump. So if this were extremely low or high, as the case may be, this jump overshoot will trigger on every single jump, which would just make the camera look a bit silly and distracting. And so we could control exactly at what speed will jump overshoot trigger. So in the case of this particular demo, negative 1500 is the sweet spot. It won't trigger on a normal jump. It will trigger on a spring. So another feature we have access to is the jump lock. So the jump lock locks the y-axis when we're jumping up and down. So the camera will move left and right, but it won't move up and down when we're jumping. So this is good if you want a side scroller with a very steady camera that just pans nicely across. Even if the player's jumping up and down, it'll just pan on the x-axis. Now jump lock is smart enough to know the difference between jumping and falling. So of course if you fall, you do want the camera to move on the y-axis. And it's also smart enough to know the difference between jumping on a spot and jumping off a cliff. Because of course if you jump off a cliff, you do want it to move on the y-axis as well. And likewise, it's smart enough to know, using the jump threshold we mentioned before, it's also smart enough to know when there's a spring. So it's locked when we're just doing normal jumps, but as soon as we use a spring, it unlocks. One problem with this sort of jump lock though is stairs. If you have a lot of consecutive jumps, you'll quickly run into problems like this. Because with jump lock on, basically the camera is only really updating when you're on the ground. And if you're not on the ground much, because every time you hit the ground you immediately jump again, your camera doesn't have much time to update. And so you end up with this jerky movement, and you end up with the problem of you just running out of space at the top. So we have stairs-friendly mode to combat this. Now, stairs-friendly mode is an alternate jump lock mode it's a little bit less pure. You can see that the camera still is moving a little bit up and down. So this is with no jump lock. The camera moves up and down a lot. With a pure jump lock, it's completely locked on the y-axis. And with stairs-friendly mode, it's not completely locked. It still moves a little bit. But that helps us with the stairs. Now, the other change in stairs-friendly mode is that it will automatically disable if the player hits the upper portion of the screen. And so, with these combined, it's very forgiving of stairs. So the cost of it is that the locking isn't pure. There is minor Y movement, but you can pretty much never out-jump it. It will always keep up, and it will have quite smooth movement even when climbing stairs like this. And like I mentioned, one of the ways it does this is by disabling it as soon as the player gets high enough. And so this is a number that you can control here to fine-tune that, the point at which it kicks in. So if you like, you also have platform snapping, which is essentially a more extreme version of the jump lock. In this mode, the y-axis will always be locked until you land on a platform. Now, I believe this was used in some older games, like Super Mario World and the original Rayman. And so it's here if you like it, although it is to be used with caution because it's not as flexible and not as forgiving. It will only update the y-axis when you're on the ground. So, for example, in a situation like this, when I fall, it remains up here until I hit the ground down below. So I'm off the screen for a moment there. I would not recommend using it unless you really want it and you really know how to use it well. Now, another related feature is WallJump Lock. So, by default, when in a game that supports wall jumping, when jumping up a wall, the camera will sort of swivel side to side as it keeps following the player, who keeps moving sort of side to side. Now, that can be a little bit distracting. I'll just do it without any of this stuff. Sort of means that as you're jumping up and down, it's quite wobbly. So wall jump prevents that. What it means is that it essentially locks the x-axis when on a wall. When on a wall and jumping into the wall. So if I jump off a wall, it doesn't lock the x-axis. It follows me if I jump in this direction. But if I'm jumping into the wall and up, it locks it. So there is a little bit of X movement, but it's much more diminished. On top of all of these features, these overshoots and jump lock and so forth, you can also just permanently push the camera one way or another using this bias section here. So for example, you might want the camera to always be a bit above the player so that the player is in the middle of the screen but is more towards the bottom. Or if you're doing an endless runner where your player is always moving one direction, you might just want the camera to be always biased towards that one direction. So another thing we have in volCAMERA is built-in camera shake. So this is a very simple camera shake that is very simple to use in your game. There's this one single action is all you need to do to make the camera shake. So anywhere else in your Fusion code, you simply have to call this one simple action, and that will make the camera shake. And in that action, you can specify how much you want the camera to shake. So this is the value here that determines it. This demo here allows you to try different camera shakes. So this is 45 is sort of a fairly moderate, fairly strong, but not too crazy. Really, a low value would be a tiny little shake. So this determines not just how strongly the camera shakes, but also how long it shakes for. So if we make this very high, like 140 or something, It shakes a lot, and it shakes for quite a while. So the final value I want to talk about here is this one, the catch-up transition speed value. Now, you probably won't really need to touch this if you don't want. This is more of a fine-tuning value, so you can happily leave it alone, but I'll just go through it now, though, to explain a bit about what it does if you do want to have a tweak of it. So you'll notice down here the catch-up speed is split into two, catch-up desired and actual catch-up. So the catch-up speed is the speed with which the blue camera catches up to the grey target. So here, I've showed you earlier, this is a very slow catch-up, and we can speed it up. Now, if I'm using a single catch-up value, then you'll see that basically the desired catch-up and the real catch-up are always the same. I mean, the real catch-up is kind of fiddling around a little bit there, but it's essentially always hovering around that value. But if we choose the multiple catch-up values, let's say we wanted this camera to catch up very slowly in the air, but very quickly on the ground. So it sort of floats through the air, but as soon as we land, we want it to catch up really quickly again. So we would make the ground catch-up values very high, and the air catch-up values very low, jumping and falling. So now we see that the desired catch-up changes, because now when we're on the ground, Y catch-up desired is 0.09, but when we're in the air, it's different, because we've asked it to be different. And the real Y catch-up, the real-time value here for Y catch-up, it moves towards the desired catch-up at a certain speed. So that's what this does. So if we have a very high value for the catch-up transition speed, then the real-time value will very quickly jump to the desired value. So as soon as the desired catch-up changes from 0.09 to 0.01, the real catch-up almost instantaneously changes as well. Whereas if we have a very low value here, the opposite happens. So it's quite slow to get to our new desired value, and in fact it doesn't even, by the time it gets to about 0.03, we've already landed, and the desired value has already hit 0.09 again, and we never even made it to 0.01 because it's so slow to change the value. So like I said, this is sort of a fine-tuning situation, so it will make a difference in certain things. So for example, we wanted the ground speed to be very quick, but the air camera speed to be very slow. So let's drop off this cliff now and see what happens. It seemed to be like a fairly smooth movement. In fact, it wasn't that. And you can see, because we've got a very slow speed here, even though we want it to be 0.01 in the air, if we just drop off the cliff here, it doesn't even hit 0.01. So if we have a very quick speed here, it does hit 0.01 very quickly, and so you can see the difference here visually. The camera is very reactive, very quick on the ground. As soon as we hit the air, boom, slows down, and then as soon as we hit the ground on the bottom, it catches up really quickly again. So that's the difference that this catch-up transition speed makes. So when we have a change of desired catch-up speed, this determines how quickly that change occurs. So you can see now with a very slow speed, it basically makes the change much less noticeable because, well, the change is less severe. This makes a difference in certain other situations with the WallJump Lock on, for example. The way the WallJump Lock works is the X speed here. This is for simplicity change instead of single catch up again. So the X speed here is on 0.08, but when we hit a wall, it becomes 0.01, like very low, almost 0.001. And that's how the WallJump block works by making the desired catch-up so low, it effectively locks or almost locks the X axis of the camera. But what happens when you're on a wall and you suddenly want to jump off to here? Well, from a very low value of 0.001, it suddenly wants to go to 0.08. And depending on the catch-up speed you have here, that will change how quickly it moves to 0.08. So, the very low speed, see, from this very low speed took a very long time for it to work its way up there to 0.08. With a very high speed, that will be much more instantaneous. Okay, so that's just two examples of how changing not just the catch-up speed, but changing how quickly changes to the catch-up speed work. Two examples of how that changes the feeling of this camera. Okay, so that's it. volCAMERA is available on the Click Store for a few bucks. The link is below. I hope it's useful to you. Subscribe to this channel to hear about other tools I might release in the future, or to hear more about my game Spryke. And all the best. Cheers.